My name's Chloe Sterling. And if you told me 5 years ago that I'd fake marry a billionaire to save my kids from a man who called them baggage, I would have laughed. Because 5 years ago, I still believed in love. Now, I believe in survival. That night, I didn't plan to ruin my life. But life has a way of ruining you first. I was supposed to be getting married. The dress was ready, the flowers were perfect, and Zane, my fiancé, was supposed to love me. But somewhere between the champagne toast and the vows, he looked me in the eye and said the words that cracked something inside me forever. Chloe, I can't do this. I can't raise someone else's kids. It wasn't the words that hurt. It was how easily he said them, like my children were stains he couldn't wash off. Sean and Nina, my entire world. Two little hearts I would burn the world for. I stood there, holding my breath as guests pretended not to stare. Zane kept talking about how I'd tricked him, how I was too much baggage. And I kept thinking, this can't be happening here, not in front of everyone. So I ran, out of the ballroom, out of that perfect hotel, barefoot, mascara streaking like war paint. And that's when I crashed into him. Tall, sharp suit, cold eyes. A man who looked like he didn't belong in this world of small dreams and small people. "Are you all right?" he asked, voice deep, low, like control wrapped in calm. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Something about him made my throat close. That's when Zane's voice echoed again from the hallway, sneering loud enough for the universe to hear. "You think anyone would want you with your baggage?" Something in me snapped, and before I could stop myself, I turned toward the stranger, grabbed his arm, and said the most reckless words of my life. "Meet my ex-husband, the real father of my children." The man didn't flinch, didn't even blink. He just looked at me, slow, calculating, then turned to Zane and said, "Funny, I don't remember you." The room went dead silent. I don't know why he played along. Maybe it was pity, maybe curiosity, or maybe fate was having one last laugh. Because that man was Elias Blake, the man whose name I didn't know would change everything. When I woke the next morning, the headlines were already spreading. Billionaire CEO Elias Blake spotted with mystery woman and her two children. And I realized this wasn't over. It was just beginning. I didn't see Elias Blake again for 2 days. 2 days of replaying that moment in my head. The lie, the stares, the heat of his arm under my hand. I couldn't explain it, but I felt seen. Not pitied, not judged, just seen. Until that morning when his car showed up in front of my tiny apartment. Black, expensive, and completely out of place among the chipped paint and flickering streetlights of my world. He stepped out, no bodyguards, no press, just him. And in his hand, a marriage contract. "Miss Sterling, I have a proposal." At first I laughed. I thought he was joking. But Elias Blake doesn't joke. His words cut like silk over steel. "My grandmother believes I should marry to secure a portion of my company's shares. 10% to be exact. I need someone who won't complicate things." "And you think that's me?" I asked. "You did publicly claim to be my ex-wife," he said, that cold smile flickering at the corner of his mouth. "I'm simply suggesting you make it official." I wanted to scream, to tell him he was insane. But then I looked back at my kids. Sean's lunchbox duct taped together again, Nina's shoes one size too small, and I realized what desperation really sounds like. So I said the words that sealed my fate. "Fine, I'll marry you." His eyes softened, just a fraction. "Good, because I already told my grandmother I found you." And that's how it started. One minute, I was a single mom fighting to stay afloat. The next, I was being driven to the Blake family estate, a place that looked less like a home and more like a small kingdom. His grandmother, Margaret Blake, was everything you would imagine an empire matriarch to be: elegant, terrifying, and impossible to read. When she saw Sean and Nina, her entire face lit up. "My great-grandchildren," she whispered, hugging them like they were their own flesh and blood. I should have corrected her. I should have said the truth. But Elias's hand found mine, a silent reminder of the deal we'd made. So I smiled. And for one horrifying moment, I almost believed the lie. That night, while tucking the kids into a room bigger than our old apartment, I caught Elias watching me. He stood by the doorway, no expression, just studying. Finally, he said quietly, "You don't need to be afraid here, Chloe." I wanted to believe him, but something about the way he said it felt like a promise he didn't fully understand. Because being in his world wasn't safety. It was danger dressed in diamonds. And deep down, I knew this wasn't the end of my story. It was the start of a very beautiful, very dangerous lie. It didn't take long for the walls of the Blake estate to start closing in. Luxury has a strange way of making you feel trapped, too polished to breathe, too perfect to touch. Every morning, I'd wake up next to a man who looked like a secret. Elias Blake, calm, impossible, unreadable. He didn't ask questions, didn't demand affection. He simply existed, like a storm that hadn't decided where to strike yet. And then came the dinner. 100 crystal glasses, 1,000 whispers, and one sharp voice that cut through it all. His cousin, Leonard. "A surprise, really," Leonard said, swirling his wine. "Two children appearing out of nowhere. You'll forgive me, cousin, if I ask for proof." The room froze. Proof. He meant a paternity test. My heart stopped. I glanced at Elias, but his expression didn't flicker. He lifted his glass calmly and said, "If that will put your mind at ease, I see no problem." That night, after everyone had gone, I confronted him. "You can't let them test my children like this." "I won't," he said simply. "Leave it to me." I didn't know what he meant, not until days later, when Leonard stormed into the mansion looking like he'd swallowed a wasp. The results were in, and they proved Elias Blake was the biological father of my kids. The room erupted with congratulations. Grandmother Margaret cried, Leonard left humiliated, and I just stood there, numb, because I knew it wasn't possible. And the only person who wasn't smiling was Elias. Later that night, when the house was quiet and the kids asleep, I found him on the balcony staring at the city below. "I knew you switched the results," I said. It wasn't a question. He didn't look at me, just said, "I had to. She's old, Chloe. That joy you saw, it keeps her alive." Something in his voice cracked then. For the first time, I saw the man beneath the armor, the guilt, the duty, the exhaustion of carrying an empire on his back. "You didn't have to lie for me," I whispered. "You're right, I didn't." And that's when I realized he wasn't protecting me anymore. He was protecting us. In the weeks that followed, Elias played the role of a humble husband. To my kids, he was funny, kind, patient in a way I never expected. But behind that gentle facade, he was hiding something else.
He told me he was unemployed, just helping out until he found new work. I believed him because I wanted to, but I should have known. Men like Elias Blake don't look for jobs. They own them. And while I was busy falling for the man he pretended to be, the truth about who he really was already closing in. The strange thing about lies is how easily they start to feel like truth. Breakfast turned into laughter, laughter turned into trust, and trust, that dangerous word, started to feel like love. For a while, it was perfect. Elias would drop me off at work every morning in that modest old sedan of his, dressed in plain shirts, looking like any other man. He'd kiss my forehead, tell Sean to behave, tell Nina to dream big. And I'd watch him drive away, thinking maybe, just maybe, I'd finally found peace. But peace doesn't last long in my life. At the Blake Group, the company I never knew he owned, things were getting ugly. Two colleagues, Jasmine and Joe, decided that the assistant designer with two kids was an easy target. They stole my designs, mocked my work, told everyone I was only hired because of sympathy. I wanted to fight back. But in that world, people like me didn't get to fight. They got replaced. Until one morning, the impossible happened. Jasmine and Joe were fired, effective immediately. Their dismissal came directly from upper management. And guess who got promoted? Me. The official email said, effective today, Chloe Sterling is appointed lead designer for the Waterfront Estates project. My hands shook as I read it. That project was worth millions, and I knew I didn't earn it. Not really. Later that night, I caught a glimpse of Elias outside the office. He was leaning against that same sedan, talking to a man in a tailored suit, a man I recognized, his assistant. But the way the assistant bowed slightly, the way he called him Mr. Blake, that's what froze me. I stood there, hidden behind the glass, watching my unemployed husband give orders to the very company I worked for. I didn't say a word, not then. I just went home and tucked the kids in like nothing had happened. But every time he smiled after that, every time he reached for my hand, I wondered which version of him I was touching, the man I thought I knew, or the CEO who built an empire on lies. A week later, he invited me and the kids to dinner, a high-end steakhouse downtown, the kind of place that charges you for breathing. Everything was perfect, until the manager walked over, bowed slightly, and said, "Good evening, Mr. Blake. Your private suite is ready." The world went silent again. Sean looked confused, Nina giggled, and I just sat there, staring at the man who had lied to me for weeks. He didn't deny it, didn't even try. He just said softly, "Chloe, please, let me explain." But explanations don't fix betrayal. They just make it hurt longer. That night, I realized something. Maybe Elias wasn't the villain I thought he was. Maybe he was just another person trying to protect too many people at once. But love built on secrets, it's like glass, beautiful until it breaks. And mine was already cracking. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Every memory, every smile, every quiet moment between us replayed in my head like scenes from a movie I suddenly realized was scripted. The man who'd tucked my kids in at night. The man who'd kissed my forehead every morning. The man I'd started to love was the same man who'd been signing my paychecks all along. And yet, something deeper was clawing at me. Something that didn't make sense. Why me? Why would a billionaire, out of everyone in the world, choose me for his fake marriage? The answer came when I found the box. It was hidden in his study, behind a row of old financial journals. a small, black velvet box. Inside was a woman's watch, silver, scratched, engraved with my initials. I froze. That watch had been lost years ago. 5 years, to be exact. The night I'd saved a stranger's life. It was a rainy night on the outskirts of the city. I was working a late shift at the diner when I heard the crash. A car flipped over, smoke rising, headlights flickering like dying stars. I ran out, crawled through shattered glass, and pulled the driver out just before the tank caught fire. He was barely conscious, bleeding, whispering something about being followed. And before the ambulance came, he pressed that watch into my palm and said, "If I make it out of this, I'll find you." Then he was gone. My chest tightened as the memory hit. The silver watch, the scar under his jaw. Elias Blake wasn't just my husband. He was the man I saved 5 years ago. When he walked into the room later that night, I was holding the watch. His face drained of color. "You knew," I said quietly. "I didn't," he replied, voice cracking. "Not until you said your name that day at the hotel. I wanted to tell you, but you didn't," I snapped. "You built a marriage out of lies. You made me live in a house full of ghosts just to protect your grandmother." He took a step closer. "No, Chloe. I did it because I owed you my life." The silence between us felt heavier than truth itself. For a moment, I saw the man he truly was. Not the CEO, not the manipulator, just Elias. Haunted, human, desperate to make something right. He reached for my hand. "You saved me once," he whispered. "Let me save you this time." I didn't answer. Because love isn't always a second chance. Sometimes it's the courage to walk away. Weeks passed. The media frenzy faded. The Blake Group returned to its perfect, polished image. But me? I walked out of that mansion with my kids, my designs, and a lesson burned into my soul. You can survive betrayal. You can rebuild after heartbreak. But the hardest thing in the world is learning to love someone who's finally telling the truth. And sometimes, that's the only truth worth hearing.